Hello, Brian. Hello, Dominic.
Hi, Hayley. Hi, Dominic.
Hi, Brian.
Hayley, it's my great privilege to introduce to you a new friend who I'm extraordinarily impressed with, and I would need to say honestly a little intimidated by how smart he is. Dominic is a therapist, a Catholic theologian with the Catholic Theological Society of America. He speaks fluently Arabic, don't tell me, German and French, and is proficient in Italian and Spanish in addition to English. He's worked all over the world as a professional coach and mentor, and he gave everything, he puts everything to the side to start this effort, this service called Flourishing Gays, which attempts to help high achieving, openly gay, bisexual, and transgender men the opportunity to explore their untapped gifts. So Flourishing Gays, and I participated in one of the open discussions, and I was really impressed, especially with Dominic.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. And just one, I'm not a therapist. I certainly admire therapists, and the work I do is complementary, let's say, to psychotherapy, but I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not trained in that area. Rather, coaching is my field, and my training in leadership development more broadly.
As soon as I said it, I thought, I don't think that's right, but
Okay.
He'll correct you if it's wrong.
Yeah.
Amazing. Dominic, can you give us sort of a background in terms of how you got to Flourishing Gays and how that was born?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the main thing is really noticing a gap. You know, I've been gay a long time, and I had never been in a space where for gay men or gay, bi, queer, and trans men, like Flourishing Gays now is, which was devoted to leadership development. And I thought, I'm really into growing as a person, growing as a leader. I'm really into being gay. That's just kind of who I am. Why wasn't there any opportunity? Why isn't there any place for that? I had been in, a gay men's chorus. I'd run in an LGBT running club. I've heard of psychotherapy that is for, let's say, gay men. But for folks who are in a place of, well, life is good, life is okay, I'm doing fine, who want to go to excellence, to flourishing, to fulfillment, I didn't know of any space or opportunity for that situation. And I thought, the world would be a better place, not just for LGBTQ folks, but for everybody, if there were more queer flourishing.
Yeah.
Dominic, will a queer or gay, bisexual, transgender man flourish differently to a different point than a heterosexual man? Well,
what I would say is this: the context is different. Of course, the bodily context of being a man versus a woman, the gender context of being a man, and then if we just want to talk about the legal, the religious, the family, the relational context, those are all distinctive, and there's some distinctions, of course, between bisexual and gay men, or queer and gay, or trans and gay, but those all affect what flourishing looks like and what floundering looks like as well. So I mean, my work is informed really by research in two fields: one, leadership, and the other, adult human development, which is a sort of focus under developmental psychology. And again, I'm not a psychologist, but I learned from that field, and we know that adults develop and grow into certain capacities, certain stages of capacity. And so one answer to your question that adds to what I said about context is, well, those stages are the same for all humans. what's available to us as we grow and develop. Research is showing, yeah, it's actually, we know what that looks like. It's not that there's something different for queer folks than for straight folks, but how to get there is different. What the person in that stage shows up with, it is a little distinctive, because we're all unique beings. And so part of why your flourishing matters, and Hayley, your flourishing matters. You have a unique and distinctive contribution to make to the universe that I could never make myself. And so I care about, and I am committed to your flourishing, in part because of standing up for that unique contribution.
What is your definition of flourishing, or how do you define flourishing?
Yeah, well, there is something developmental about it. So being on our growth edge, being in the process of becoming, actively, intentionally, openly, that is one part of it. So in other words, if you or I reach some kind of achievement, or some kind of level of skill building, or whatever, that for a long time we've been working at, and like, oh my God, that's my goal, to become a lawyer, or if you then just stay there, well, that's not flourishing. And maybe the working towards that was part of your unfolding of yourself and of your potential. But as soon as we become static, we start to stagnate.
Yeah.
So as living dynamic beings, part of what we are called to is to keep growing. And that forward moving, and forward is already kind of a fraught, a directional metaphor, but that kind of expansion is, I think, at the heart of flourishing.
You mentioned a really interesting word, or phrase, I guess it was, adult human development. And I think that is so important, and one of the things that I'm extremely excited about right now, because this idea that we stop developing and we don't need to be concerned with developing once we hit adulthood, or literally like leave home.
Yep.
I feel like, and I wanted to get your take on this, that developing as an adult is almost more intensive than developing as a child.
I don't know if it's more intensive. I mean, childhood is tough in all kinds of ways, and the half-life of stages is shorter. We know this from being with a human in their first year. Like, oh my God, the kid does this now. It's amazing, and what that experience is like in terms of how difficult. It's hard to know, like, what is an infant's experience, but part of what's different about adult development is there's all kinds of conditions about us that actually, in society, in human relations and how we get along, that actually stymie and work against our growing. The status quo is super attractive, especially, if we have a home and we have a job and we have maybe even a partner or kid. It's like, I'm cooked. This recipe is complete. Like, no need to grow anymore, right? So the intensivity in some ways is shaking off the inertia of the status quo. And sometimes that's countercultural, especially if we haven't yet, or rather, especially if we have already achieved success as defined by society. If we have the paycheck or the nice home, or the 2.1 kids in the white picket fence, society's like, you're good. You are good. Just be, a pillar of our society, our community, as they say. And so if somebody in that situation actually says, you know what, I still want to expand. I want to grow. I'm changing. Something about me is shifting. I want to become myself even more fully. That's hard. That's even where this, the spiritual traditions might talk about the dark night of the soul, where it's like everyone around you is like, why are you changing? You're so
everything's fine. Don't change it.
Exactly.
Dominic, can you personalize this for us? I mean, the flourishing, I would think, is not all that different than the phraseology of the hero's journey, where somebody feels called and they go through a process and they arrive. And you've certainly had more than one in your life, but can you talk about your own flourishing or your own hero's journey, about how did you get to where you are at this moment in life?
Yeah, sure. There are, of course, many chapters to the book of my life, even at this, sort of middle age where I find myself. But yeah, I guess one place I could go is the coming out experience, because that is a common one. I mean common in that it's shared by LGBTQ folks who do come to identify as LGBTQ, and how that mixes with the achievement or the kind of making it. So for me, I dated girls in high school. I was in an all boys Catholic school in Omaha, and we were all trying to figure out how to be boys, and we're all trying to figure out how to be men and what that might even look like as we grew into that. And that sort of sometimes seemingly unknowable creature, the girl, was like a mystery to all of us, and as we were a mystery to ourselves in so many ways. But I sort of fit fine into that, confusing stage of life, adolescence, and in the sort of, middle class existence I had. And at the same time, I realized, all of us boys are interested in each other's bodies. That's just part of being a teenager. But at some point, like junior, senior year, I was like, I'm a little bit more interested in other boys' bodies. And I'm, I guess, yes, there's all this sexual energy going around, as our hormones are raging. But I'm just a little bit more oriented towards like, other boys in terms of the sort of sexual charge. And it's like, I want to explore that. I don't know what that's about. I want to explore that. And I see that in this place, in this society that I'm living in Omaha, in this high school in the, I guess, 90s, early 90s, it's not really an option to explore that in much of an explicit way. So I thought, I'm going to go off to college and I'll explore it then. And so I went off in the end to Boston College, which, another Jesuit institution. I went to a Jesuit high school in Omaha. And I thought, it's a bigger city, it's a different place. And I pledged sort of secretly to explore that part of myself. But in the end, my feeble attempts, awkward attempts with other guys, like in my freshman dorm, like I was clueless, and it didn't lead to anything really. And meanwhile, I fell in love with a young woman, and she and I ended up dating for kind of 7 years on and off. And it was real. It was, I love her, and I still love her as a dear friend today, with, yes, a complex relationship. But that, again, in that context, I had a hard time finding my way. And meanwhile, I was discovering that I was a really good student. I loved the life of the mind, and I got into languages and literature and some of the ones that you mentioned. And I was, kind of a budding intellectual. I was like, wow, I love learning. And I got accolades increasingly, in that, fine university, and had mentors. And so in some ways I was growing as a Catholic intellectual. I was growing as a man. And I was living a totally straight life. And I identified as straight, or maybe if I was really pressed, I'd say, well, I'm somewhere on the spectrum. I was aware of the Kinsey scale. And I'm like, yeah, obvious, of course, I'm not perfectly on this side, but like, who is, that's part of the findings of the whole Kinsey research project. So I didn't really know beyond that. And so then I left again, and I left in a more radical way. I left America for Egypt. and moved to Cairo. And there, again, following the Jesuit institution thing, I became a volunteer teacher in the all-boys French immersion Jesuit high school in Cairo. And I was put in a place then with different gender roles and different sexual politics and different language and different, class things. And I mean, Cairo is one of the largest cities in the world, 20 million people. And I had to find my place in that and find my way in that as a 22-year-old, young man. So I think, the track of the hero's journey is already a little bit apparent, and like in some ways we could look back at this now from myself as a professional homosexual now, and saying like Dominic was trying to go and make his great escape and I'm trying to like take off the trappings of straighthood, but I didn't know. I was just trying to explore the world. I was trying to become myself, and I put myself in Arab society, the largest city in the Arab world, and well, where dating is not kosher, to use the Jewish word, mostly Muslim context, but it's a homosocial society. Men hang out with men, women hang out with women. That's how society goes. The typical thing for Egyptians is you go to the cafe. For Egyptian men, you go to the cafe, you smoke shisha or nargila, you drink tea, you play backgammon. That's like what most men do with other men every night. It's not going to the bars with your girlfriend or other couples. And no, that's not how, so it was there in a way that I had my first boyfriend, and we didn't use the word boyfriend. He was another white American Catholic that I met at church in Cairo. And that blew apart my sense of self, the person I had become throughout high school, college, and it was in the kind of aftermath of that experience in around 25 where I started really putting back together the pieces of myself and going to gay bars and dating gay men in a sort of regular routine way. And that was, I mean, there's more to this story, of course, but that's the sort of arc of that journey for me.
And then you worked for a big firm successfully, right? In your bio, and you left the firm. When you got into theological work and university work, and what was the urge each time to leave? What was the call?
Yeah, well, I would say that those big life decisions of mine were not so much urges to leave as urges to seek. It wasn't, oh, I got to get out of here. I mean, in some cases it had some of that energy, but it was much more like I'm oriented towards something. Something else is next. I've sort of, I would say one of the principles of my life has been my own growth and development, and especially early on, the first half of my life. I mean, when I hit 40, I felt like the pendulum swung a little bit, so that my own development was no longer the organizing principle of my, life decisions, and it's more about contributing to others that became more. That's a little bit what happened for me. I'm now 46, so, but yeah, the sort of seeking, finding, becoming, learning, growing, exploring, those were the impulses that were behind me. Yeah, even doing a PhD in Arabic and Islamic studies, and then intermixing that with management consulting work at McKinsey in the Middle East, and then going back to McKinsey and doing that work in the New York area in the United States, and then going towards like academia and being a tenure track professor and directing a center for Muslim Christian dialogue. So it was always going towards something that for my own expansion.
Mm-hmm.
How did you, or what did you draw upon to sort of have that confidence to keep making these leaps?
I was confident.
Confidence, courage. I mean, I think it takes confidence just believing in yourself to say, okay, I can actually do this now, because they're big things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a fair question. And, I would say the leaps that I kind of narrated a little bit more in detail earlier built on each other. Like, to move from home after, living in Omaha, where my family's been for more than a century on both sides, and to go off to college to Boston, that was a leap. I mean, as I look now, it's like, oh, yeah, cute, but at the time it was scary. And well, what made that possible? First of all, my mother being supportive, even though she went, she lived her whole life in Omaha, and she went to university and law school in Omaha. But she was like, yeah, you can do this, and yeah, this will be good for you, and yeah, let's go on a college, search trip, her and my stepdad, like with my sister, like we went on a driving 17-day or whatever it was, 20-day, summer vacation, which was punctuated by college visits. So they were supportive of, and I needed their support. I wouldn't have been able to do that, of course, without their encouragement. And I think it was those mentors at Boston College who believed in me, who modeled for me immersion in other languages and literatures and cultures, and some of the international volunteer, work that goes on at Boston College, that was like, yeah, you can do this, and go off to a developing country in another language, and you can learn another language. You can do this. And it was like, really, it's like, kind of course it was really scary. That I knew that was scary. I mean, and like all of my family are like, oh my God, my grandmother was saying novenas for me, right? Like if she'd see the news about terrorists, and she'd think, oh my God, that's where my little Nick is going. So I would say each leap built on a foundation for the next.
And
go ahead, Hayley.
no, you can go, Brian.
Well, going back to Flourishing Gays, if I could, with you, I believe that when we talk about valuing diversity, which is, the catchphrase for all of the diversity and inclusion work at the corporate level, that each person brings, because of their life experiences, unique gifts to the table. But Dominic, do you believe that there are any innate gifts with being a gay man?
I wouldn't say innate in the sense of, born into us, but being gay is being part of a social construct. I mean, gayness, as we experience it, you and I living in this time, it's a particular social phenomenon. It's historically situated, culturally constructed. I mean, so what are aspects of that? I mean, even in some ways, our experience of homophobia is a counterpunch that we have to cope with and react to. And in all of those contexts that we were talking about earlier, our religious community, and our family experiences, are the legal context that we live in, where, until very recently, we could be fired for being gay, for example. Those challenges, I would say, goad out of us strengths, powers. I've talked about queer superpowers. And I don't think we develop our queer superpowers in a vacuum. They're not innate. They're not like we are born with, angel wings or fairy wings on our back. It's more that, we're stuck in a quagmire that degrades us or threatens to murder us psychically or actually physically. And so we're going to grow fairy wings to fly, because we need them in order to be alive, in order to survive. So I would say that there is this interplay that in a way, I don't want to say determines, but very much forms the kinds of gifts that queer people have developed to be ourselves in the world today.
Dominic, do you believe in destiny, or what are your thoughts on destiny?
Yeah, I don't know. I certainly recognize the sort of mystery of our lives, of ourselves. I mean, I guess even the word or the phrase "human potential" is one that for me is a bit matched with this one of destiny. In other words, you hold within your DNA, your physical DNA, your psychological DNA, whatever that is innate in some sense, like some potential for becoming that is special to you. And I don't know what that is, and you don't know what that is actually, until and unless you're given, the right fairy dust or the right air and sunlight or whatever, and frankly, love and encouragement and support and guidance to become you, to become yourself more fully. And if those conditions, or some of them, are around, and if you step into the gulp step of those courageous leaps like we were talking about, then I think you step towards your destiny. That, in other words, the unfolding, and I often use that metaphor, like a great flag or a great tapestry of artistically woven, that is our us. That's how we unfold ourselves. That's how we become ourselves, and that's our destiny. Our destiny is to flourish. And so another sense, and going back to the question you asked earlier, yes, flourishing is growing and developing and becoming, but flourishing is also being ourselves fully.
Being on the path.
Being on the path and letting, if we have wings, to like unfurl those wings, and then learn how to flap them.
Use them.
Yeah, and maybe learn how to do loop-de-loops, whatever,
Dominic, one of the things that I like about Flourishing Gays is that your willingness to restrict the chats that happen between individuals, the actual mentoring to men, because men, especially gay men, have had a hard time saying they need their own space. As soon as we would do it, we would be charged with sexism or elitism or whatever it was, and gay boys, and this is where I want to go, if you would, with me on this conversation. I do believe that there are innate gifts. I believe that, and challenge me please, but biology has shown that gay boys' brains look different than straight boys' brains, that there's a cluster of cells that allows us to go back and forth between the lobes of our brain that are much more like female brains than they are heterosexual brains, male brains. And so I believe that a gift that we have not celebrated has been this ability to sensitively and thoughtfully see things in ways that others might not. Thus you can often pick, teachers and parents often can pick out the little boy in the room who they know is going to be, end up one day saying that they're gay. Why? Because they're thoughtful and they often speak up in behalf of other students, especially those who might be bullied. The reason I believe this is true is that in hearing story after story after story of gay men talking about their childhood, these seem to be common denominators. that we were the nice kid, right? What do you, and we've spent so much of our lives defending our sexual attractions and saying that they're not bad. That's what gay pride was all about, right? I'm not ashamed, I'm proud, in the same way that Black is beautiful. You know, Black women were countering this image that you're not as pretty as white women, so Black is beautiful. The reason I get excited about Flourishing Gays is that I really believe we're at a time in history in which we have to help gay people, men, women, say, yes, I have gifts and I've always had them. Two-spirit people, you know, were gay. People throughout history who were the artists, the monks who copied the, you know, in very pretty little lettering, all the stuff that they were keeping from the barbarians who were, they were all gay men. You know, would you speak to that?
Yeah. Well, what I know from my own experience is, you know, I wasn't a gay kid. I was myself, and I identified as straight, and I was straight. I mean, so I absolutely honor your own experience, but I don't know what it's like to be that boy. Okay. At the same time, you know, I have some childhood friends who have only and always fallen in love with women, and who, you know, they're boys, they're men. And they were thoughtful, they were kind, they were, they spoke up for the other, they had a sense of justice, and that's who they are, as, you know, as then and now and always straight. So I think part of the, you know, because of the persecution, because of the marginalization and oppression, the hatred of difference that we experience in the wider world, there, of course, we develop this sense of pride and this sense of value and worth in ourselves that is merited. And I certainly share with you. And I guess I'm not willing to go in this place of, yeah, and we're better than straight guys, or we have gifts that straight people can't have. Well, I'm just not ready to go quite there. I do think instead, rather, that this encounter of obstacles, this encounter of challenge, even this encounter of hatred, can, if we're given enough, you know, kind of that air, soil, and light, allow us to develop gifts of empathy, for example, of advocacy for the underdog, for example, of group sense, you know, kind of reading a room. I think these are part of human potential, and I do think that you know, one of the convictions that I sort of create events on is that queer flourishing benefits everybody, and that's partly because we can model what can be possible for straight folks. You know, compassion is absolutely available to straight white men. It absolutely is, even if toxic masculinity that is bro-y and misogynist and violent and selfish, like, even if that's the standard which is being raised in, you know, certain societies today, I think that they absolutely can become, in a way, more human and more real, and perhaps the feminine energies that queer, gay, bi, and trans men are often more comfortable with, is part of the path to that.
Dominic, Brian and I have been talking for quite some time about the power of sex and sexuality, and in hearing this, it really makes me think about the power in the balance between the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And I noticed, looking at your site and sort of looking at Flourishing Gays, is that very much the way I saw it, very much celebrated the divine masculine in a very sort of positive and powerful way. I also noticed that it is centered towards, based on just initially looking at it, that it is centered towards gay or homosexual men. How important is it to you, obviously, for the divine masculine, but also in terms of reaching the straight white or straight men?
How important is the divine masculine for?
Yeah, like in the work that you're doing with Flourishing Gays, which is focused on flourishing gays. And I wanted to just first validate that how important divine masculinity was to you and having that balance, but also how do you then, or do you see sort of being able to inspire straight men and include them in Flourishing Gays?
Yeah. Well, I would say there's two main activities that Flourishing Gays is focused on, and one is creating these spaces, men-only spaces, LGBTQ men-only spaces, for us to mentor one another and support one another's unfolding and unfurling as leaders, as human beings. And the other is helping organizations on their diversity, equity, and inclusion journeys, and to be places, to be cultures, organizational cultures that not only allow, but encourage every person to bring their distinctive gifts and contexts and identities, and including the straight white men. So I would say at the queer flourishing really is at the heart of this work that I'm up to, and because again, because nobody else is up to it, nobody else is focused on it, and as an after effect, yes, I do think, as I was kind of passionately saying a few minutes ago, that there can be benefits for straight men and women, but I didn't create Flourishing Gays, first of all, for straight men and women. I created Flourishing Gays, first of all, to fill this gap of a particular space of safety, for vulnerability, and creating a new kind of gay community that is founded on mutual support and committed to growing as human beings. Because, yeah, like Brian said, there's not spaces for gay, bi, queer, or trans men to be together in such a context. So there's taking care of queer folks first, because society doesn't do that, and then noticing that, yeah, actually this benefits the whole world. This benefits everyone.
Yeah, like Brian, I believe that the queer community has this superpower, and I do think the superpower is in bridging the divine masculine and the divine feminine, which I think the world needs. They're almost like these pioneers in being able to bridge that and have a lot to, the straight community can learn a lot from the journeys of gay, lesbian, queer people. How do you, or in your, and I, looking at Flourishing Gays as being sort of a platform for that, obviously initially gathering the community and creating a community, what are some of the ways that you see Flourishing Gays, and especially in the corporate workplace, really starting to have those tentacles out, where people are now starting to learn and be open to it first, but learning from the experience of Flourishing Gays and the men that are in Flourishing Gays?
Yeah, well, one sort of foundational, like a cornerstone of Flourishing Gays that seems relevant here is healing gender. Maybe I mentioned already, this phenomenon of toxic masculinities, which we experience in the corporate world in its own ways. The sort of, Gordon Gekko figures of Wall Street, the sort of like eat what you kill, and kind of ruthless warrior kind of model of what it is to be a business person or businessman. There's other kinds of toxic masculinity, of course. I think we had an example in the White House until recently. But there's also toxic femininities.
Absolutely.
You know, like helplessness, you know, I'm so pretty, I'm a doll, and you know, everything needs to be done for me. And this kind of, we can talk more about that. But you know, the queer community has its own toxic gender expressions, and there are absolutely, you know, toxic masculinities that are distinctively gay, and we don't need to look further than circuit parties or pig play, or I mean, the ways that gay men find to sort of manipulate and exploit one another in very distinctively gay ways. To know that, yeah, actually, you know, the LGBTQ community has not solved the problem of gender, and we have our own work to do. And I think you're absolutely on the right track in terms of honoring and opening ourselves to the masculine and feminine energies with honor and with courage, with integration, with openness. And sometimes some LGBTQ folks do muster that kind of wholeness. And of course, sometimes straight folks do too. Perhaps because we're already outside the norms and out, you know, drawing outside the lines. Gay male culture in general has a bit more of a tendency to, like, yeah, of course we queen out, we let in the feminine, you know, we can be aesthetic, for example. I mean, that's one, you know, the artistic expression is one place where, yeah, gay men, you know, thrive and find their way. But we have our work to do, and that actually is one of the cornerstones of Flourishing Gays that we focus on, because we need to find our ways of being men, genuinely men, with the divine masculine attributes of power,
yeah,
of strength, of fortitude, of drawing a line, of, you know, and the divine feminine of receptivity and flexibility and openness and group attention. We need to find ways to do that in ways that are also queer and that are effective, of course, in our whatever our position is. And you asked about corporate culture. I mean, I think of one recent client who went through, you know, my 6-month program, which is called Hero's Journey. He's a buttoned up, high achieving Black man, you know, who's been in the C-suite of very, you know, big company. And, you know, he had this sort of feminine persona that he would show to his friends or out with the, you know, the gay guys. And that feminine persona never showed up at work. That was kept for private life. And some of our work and the work with the group, the small little pocket of queer community, of gay community that he was in, you know, gave him I think the courage and the stimulus to say, you know, what if you let her show up sometimes in the book? What if you know, found ways to let your queen come out of the closet at work? I mean, he was out as a gay man. That wasn't, you know, a question, but it was always this tight and buttoned up. So bringing more of himself meant, you know, something about bringing some of that that feminine persona that was kind of his playtime into his work, and actually to expand his range,
right?
You know, in the corporate context.
Dominic, you talk about the Queen, you know, bringing his. So, in the gay male community, is the Queen a manifestation of toxic femininity that we have created as an image of what it means to act like a woman, or is it an actual tapping of our own feminine? So I agree with you that there is in the gay male community, there is a really toxic image of what a woman is. And for some people, it starts with revulsion at female genitalia, and moves from there. And then so when they take on the female persona, it's a caricature, and not a flattering one. So the question that I have, because you did teach a class on gender, is, can you help a gay man embrace his feminine without him embrace biology and all of its manifestations? Do you follow what I'm saying? I mean,
Well, I'll tell you where it brings me. So I've reflected on the queen in sort of gay male culture as a superpower or as a superhero that matches a particular developmental stage for adults, and it's a stage that the researchers will call self-authoring or achiever, and it's a stage that, in a way, American culture is trying to get folks to. It's what our education systems are trying to develop us into. It's what corporate America is wants of its managers, and it's the self-authoring person is driven by a North Star that's inside, an internal set of values, rather than the group think or what whoever out there wants. And the sort of the queen version of that, and you can think of some of the successful, powerful gay men that who maybe are, whether or not CEOs or executive directors of nonprofits or whatever, but they felt their sap, and there's a flair, there's a Oscar Wilde, flair to it that is kind of queenie and kind of maybe there's a affectation even, this kind of gesture, right? And along with that, so there are downsides. The thing about, I'm sort of conceptualizing a number of queer superpowers, and this is really just one, and they're all particular to these developmental stages. So I'm just kind of going into some depth on this queen one that I've been writing about and thinking about. The downside, the shadow side of this queer superhero or superpower is compartmentalization, where the darkness inside, all whether that's the traumas or the self-doubts, those are kept in really tight little boxes and not opened up. Or the division, actually the client I was telling you about, I think this is an example. My private life is my private life, and I keep certain versions of myself for that. And my corporate life is my corporate life, and I have a way of showing up there. So there's this tight compartmentalization of the queen. Now, is that toxic? Well, it can be, but I would just say that rather these queer superpowers each have their pitfalls. And so if the queen who has reached the self-authoring stage doesn't keep growing, that's where it can become toxic. If there's a stagnation and that those compartments crystallize and those walls between those compartments get ever more thick and strong, well, then that can be a road to demise. That can be a road to implosion. But if the queen grows out of that queenliness, and part of that work is to open up into the shadow side and open up in those compartments and let them, which is a very disconcerting stage in this sort of redefining stage that comes in the research again just after the self-authoring stage. It's a very scary and countercultural stage, but if that happens, there's a sort of refertilization as you sort of till the soil and work it and let things kind of begin to sprout anew.
I'm listening, and Brian, great question, and to you, Dominic, too, great answer. But I'm listening to both of you, and to me, this just sounds like the hero's journey that is the human's journey, because the things that you are describing are the same things that I myself as a straight person went through, and things that I see other straight people going through too. And, you know, using the example of your client who, you know, had his very corporate side and then his playful side that was for home. This is something, you know, one of the reasons why I think, you know, having these conversations is so important, because everybody I know in corporate America has this is how I show up at the office and this is how I am at home. And you don't mix the two. Nobody would know the difference. So, and I think it is, you know, that hero's journey, regardless of how you identify or which label you're identifying with, these are human concepts, at least from my perspective.
Oh, I agree. And, you know, what's different is, you know, again, the context, you know, and again, until recently, you know, the corporate gay man, if he brought his private life to the office, he could be legally fired on those grounds alone. Right. That's different from straight folks, and whatever they're keeping from their home life, they couldn't be fired for it. Or, you know, we got bullied and beaten up. You know, we know stories of, you know, kids literally murdered for being sissy boy, being like, that doesn't happen with that private side of corporate women. It's, you know, there's a different downside. So these right. Contextual pieces actually make a difference. And I know this is why I think that, you know, women need some women-only spaces for you to Absolutely. Do the mutual support and the mentor, you know, the kind of peer mentoring to grow into that next version of yourself. That, for an example, we're talking about is more integrated. And queer men need our spaces, because our, like, you know, you know, let's say women get paid whatever 72%, you know, 72 cents on the dollar of men for the same work into, you know, in American. Well, okay, so gay white men, for example, have all kinds of patriarchal privilege and racial privilege. And so some of it's like, well, how do we use our privilege and our, you know, our oppressed or marginalized sides, you know, and what is our relationship to gay Black men? And you know, we need, in other words, so part of the work for queer men is to be with those internal dynamics of privilege and marginalization, and find our way, you know, with that.
We have 5 minutes left, and I have more questions. But I wanted to check with you, Brian, if you had a question.
Well, just a comment, if I might. Earlier, Dominic, when we were talking about the gifts that gay men might have, specifically gay men, but I, you know, my focus, you know, 30 years older than you, and is now about gay elderhood. One of the gifts that came to me from Black Lives Matter and the pushback that people would say, well, all lives matter, right? Is that to say that gay men have gifts, but everyone, you know, can have the same gift, for me is taking away, just for me, is taking away my moment with other gay men to share with them what their gifts are. Now, yes, indeed, a sensitive straight man may have the same gifts, but the percentage-wise, the more likelihood is that these gay men I'm talking to share this experience of having a sissified growing up, even though they dated, were, you know, played straight, but they have a gift, you know, that I want them to be able to celebrate as unique to them. And I understand that others may have it too, but I don't want to start with that premise, because it waters it all down. It says, you know, well, straight men have the same gift, but we're just going to talk about yours. Can you resonate?
Yeah, and I mean, I honor your way of being you, and and your experience of being a gay American white man and Catholic, like me, is yours. For a number of reasons, that's not my journey. In particular, the bit like I was butch my whole life. I was good at sports my whole life. I still am. I'm athletic. I got a big body. I got muscles. I always did. I'm coordinated. So the sissy thing was just not part of my experience, and it's not now. And so maybe and so perhaps because of that, I had a longer and more arduous path to finding my way to being more in the in the gay world than in the straight world. It would have been maybe more obvious to me, but and I also am somewhere, I don't exactly identify as bisexual, but I'm somewhere in that zone. I don't know. So if I have friends who genuinely not ever in their lives, not yet ever single one time, had an attraction to a woman or a girl. Well, I can't speak. I didn't have that experience.
Right.
So I don't know what that's like. And I'm not saying that you're saying that that's been your experience, but so, we have to, I think there is something about the truth of lived experience, which deserves its honor.
Yeah.
And
uniqueness.
Its uniqueness. And so neither will I retell my story so that it fits yours, nor will I impose my construct onto you.
A quick last question, Dominic. Who are your greatest inspirations? Looking back in terms of the holistic journey that you've had so far, who would you say are your top maybe 3 or the ones that come to mind just right now?
My grandmother Longo is one who comes to mind. She was a person of tremendous dignity and sense of self-worth, and yet always, like, I used it in planning her funeral. I was kind of the, let's say, liturgical director for the funeral. I came to the phrase lavishing with love, because this is how she was. She lavished love on everyone around her and like bowed to the beauty of other people, whether they were in the family or not. Part of her story includes a suicide attempt early in life, when her secret marriage to my grandfather was sort of found out. They had eloped. They were like teenagers, and I don't know the details of her attempt, but she tried to take her own life, and because of this static, from the group, from the family, in their little Italian, little Italy in Omaha, the little community that they lived in, and as she recovered from that suicide attempt, she gained a sense of self-worth that is like, never again will I give my sense of self over to others to control.
Amazing.
Yeah, totally. So she is an inspiration to me still in her, she went to college, back in, the 19 something, like very early days. She was born in 1911. But it was very early for women to go to college. She didn't finish in the end. She thought about it. I remember in her 80s, we're talking about getting, credit for it, whatever. She wasn't like a woman of professional accomplishment, but the person she became was so extraordinary that really everyone who knew her was just like, wow, what a woman, what a human, and what a leader.
Yeah.
So I would say that she's somebody that I continue to look to as a model, let's say, for the kind of flourishing, the kind of unfurling of human potential that I'm so devoted to today.
Amazing. Great grandmother energy. Well, any other questions or comments before we wrap up? Awesome.
No, just you're going to provide us, everyone, with contact information on getting in touch with Flourishing Gays.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
I'll include the website. And yep, thank you very much, Dominic. I could go on chatting for a long time. It feels like it could be like an entire day and going off at different tangents.
Yeah,
It's been a joy. Thank you.
Yeah, for me too.
Yeah, me too.
And, you know, part of great conversation is that we all learn and grow through it, and I certainly feel that has happened.
And I think it's so important in this day and age to be able to have conversations where it is open and it is a discussion, but it's also a peaceful discussion.
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much. Have a great week, and
thank you.
Be back.
All right, sounds
Bye,
good.
Dominic.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you, Hayley.
Much.
Thank you.